Dear friends, welcome to this new video. This is a referral from a colleague for a posterior capsular rupture after cataract surgery. The capsular bag was detached over more than 180 degrees. So the first step is total removal of the residual capsular bag and at the same time aspiration of the cortex. In general, I like to go through the pre-existing main incision. Occasionally, it may be necessary to use the sclerotomy to take the cortex, which is slightly hidden under the iris. As you can see, I like to twist the vitrectomy probe after aspirating a good part of the zonule or the cortex to remove everything at once. You just turn your probe on itself like that, and then once you can't get much more than that, or our probe connections are a little bit twisted, we can aspirate and cut what we've taken. That's how you can do more quickly your zonulectomy and cortex removal, especially if the patient's dilation is poor, in the case of capsular pseudoexfoliation. We can then move on to the posterior segment. Here, we'll prepare the ground by applying viscoelastic product in the anterior chamber so as to be able to bring the nucleus up into the chamber and aspirate it. So first of all, always try to check the vitreous detachment. In this patient, it seemed to be completed given the fairly free movement of the nucleus. We'll be able to catch the nucleus that is not embedded in the vitreous and bring it up into the anterior chamber. So in general, we try to catch it quite close to the center of the nucleus, first by aspiration and then with the cut. You can also reduce the cut to get into it more easily. Once it's been brought up to the anterior Chaber chamber, it can be aspirated with the phaco probe. So it happens that some fragments fall back a little, so we take them back. And likewise, they're eaten with phaco, which goes a lot faster than with the vitrectomy probe. Don't hesitate to repeat the maneuver, even if it's a bit painful to remove all the small fragments. And then, when the fragments are small enough, we can simply eat them with the vitrectomy probe, always keeping the cut to a minimum in order to eat the small fragments. In this patient, we decided to put scleral fixation lens. We will therefore prepare the scleral flaps with conjunctival disinsertions. We'll do a nice disinsertion with a nice split for easier closure. Then we'll do a pre-incision with a knife of 45 degrees over about 3 millimeters. We'll dissect a scleral flap in order to hide the lens haptics. This avoids the risk of externalization that can sometimes occur with simple pockets. It's a much safer method, in my opinion. So it's very important to make a pre-incision at the right depth, which will enable us to be at the right place with the crescent knife and avoid going too deep. And here you really need to try to keep your eye as flat as possible and follow the curvature of the eye with your crescent knife, because you can quite easily perforate if you don't watch the orientation of your knife. You can also follow the deepness by looking through the flap to be more or less sure of what you're doing. Once you've got a clean dissection, you can simply cut with the scissors. Then we perforate 1.5 or 2 millimeters from the limbus with a 25 gauge trocar, depending on the size of the eye. More like 2 millimeters for high myopic patients. And so we're going to perforate so that our forceps can enter and reach the lens haptics. The lens can then be inserted and injected, and before you finish injecting, you can go and find a haptic to pull the lens out more easily. So here we are taking it out very gently so as not to tear off the haptics. They're quite fragile, so we use forceps with a rounded edge, and then there are several ways of picking up the second haptic. Either we can take it directly from the chamber, or we can simply push the lens into the posterior segment and catch them in the posterior segment. This is often easier because there's much more space to work with. So you can just take the lens like that. You have to pay close attention to the orientation of the lens. There's usually a drawing on the package. So try to perforate slightly towards the iris to make it easier to find the haptics. We'll also take into account the position of the nose, which can sometimes get in the way. Don't hesitate to enlarge the perforation point a little to get the haptic out more easily. Once you've got the haptics well positioned and the lens well fixed, you can simply suture the flaps. Suturing the flaps is mainly to prevent the flap from reversing and the haptics exposure. A single suture is generally sufficient unless you've put too much stress on your sclerotomies and they leak a little. In that case, it's better to suture a little more and make 2 sutures on the angles. Likewise, a single conjunctival suture is generally sufficient if you've made nice conjunctival flaps. If you've tunneled your sclerotomies well, it's usually quite tight for a first vitrectomy, so there's no need to suture. So closing is quite easy, only 4 sutures to do on this surgery. That's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and I'll see you for the next video.